Hey guys, in this podcast we talk about different health topics. As we're not medical experts, we would ask for you to check with your doctor first before using any of the information that we provide in this podcast. Furthermore, we talk about third-party views in this podcast. Please know that we have no intention of misrepresenting the views, and we apologize in advance if we do so. Thanks. Hey guys, welcome to another Contemplation, Hypothezation podcast. Today we're talking about memories and love.
Yep.
But the problem is that we know it's a really heavy topic, sensitive topic. We'll do our best to be neutral standpoints on either side. And the other thing is that we're not experts as well. So let's first talk about memories.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about the science of it first, and we'll move on to love.
Awesome.
Love. So memories, what are they, and why are they so important? So you might think like, okay, yeah, obviously a memory is just, well, it's a memory. It's something that you have in your brain, and you can recall at any time from experiences that you've had. But memory is much, much, much more complicated than that. There are different types of memory that you have, and there are different types of associations of memories that you have. So what I'm going to try to talk about first is like the relationship memories that you have, and prove to you why memories are so important in terms of actually having relationships. If you never had memories.
And to add on that, our perception of our past memories may be very inaccurate, but the way we feel about our memories affects how we live presently.
Exactly, yeah. So memories are very, like when a computer has memory and you have memory, you can kind of compare it in the amount of data storage that you have. So like a computer might have, an exabyte of data, which is a lot of, it's like 18 zeros. That's a lot of memory, and that's actually the amount of memory that humans are estimated to have, which is 10 to the 18th bytes. Right now, your common computer has like maybe a terabyte, which is 10 to the 12th. So a million times more that is in your brain.
A million times more?
A million times more that is estimated to be in your brain. Now kind of figures, some people are like maybe 10,000 times or up to a million. It's a debatable number right now. We don't know for sure. But the point is that is a ton of memory, but it's not enough memory to videotape your entire life. So a lot of people say like, oh, did you know that everything that you observed in your life, you actually have in your brain, but you can't access it? No, you don't.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, you don't. There's no physical way you could actually store that amount of memory. You couldn't store the 4K video that your eyes record. Your eyes actually record at 16K video, but that's a different topic.
Can I ask a quick question on this? Okay, so like in the video game Halo, for example, they have this thing called theater mode, where after you play a game, you can watch the game over.
Yeah.
Now, the common belief is that they're recording the game like you would a video, and then you're rewatching it. But all they're actually doing is recording the movements of people's joysticks and the buttons they push,
right?
Saving all of those into a list and then replaying it.
Yeah.
So like when we talk about like going back and having an ability to recall everything that's ever happened, is it possible that our brain is actually not recalling it from memory, but replaying a new scenario in our head that is somewhat similar to the situation that happened?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And your brain does a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. But what your brain really does actually is called selective memory, and that means it selects out the most important parts of a memory and keeps those. So let's say you're on the street and you just film let's say you watch somebody get hit by a car. That's like a pretty traumatic event that your brain is going to remember. And what you would see on like a video camera, like the latest is like 4K or 8K, our eyes are at 16K, which is like 32 times the amount of data. It's a lot more memory. So the whole point is that like your camera would see every detail. It would record it all equally the same. But when you see something, you record different things at different levels of importance. The more important something is, the more detail it has. So for example, you would record somebody's facial expression that they would make in more detail than like what their leg or arm is doing. And by recalling that memory like several years later, you're actually going to recall the facial expression, but you won't know what was in the background. It's all blurry. Your brain will actually, like the video game, fill in these memories. Mm-hmm. It would just assume that there was a road, assume there was a fire hydrant there, assume there was a building there. There were some people there, but you can't even remember it. But on a video camera, obviously you could look back at those places. So the whole point is that memories are tied to the emotions that you have. Remember that emotions create a value system that you have. So if you value something a lot, like a loved one, that emotion tied to them is also tied to the memory that you will have of them. And that's how your brain organizes importance in memories. And that's why memories are like romantic and mean so much to people, because memories
are tied to that emotion.
Yeah, they're representative of how important something is to you.
Wow. Let me just add something real quick. In like the 40s or whatever, there's a book written about conditioned reflexes, whatever. And if you're familiar with hypnosis, it's all based around this idea of conditioned reflexes. Basically, when we remember a word, like when a word is stored in our memory that we use to communicate, we associate an emotion with it. So when I say the word awesome, not only is the word
or
awesome
legendary,
stored, or legendary, not only is that word stored in my head, but it's an emotion is linked to it.
Yes.
So the idea behind hypnosis is that like when we say like your eyes are getting heavier, when we hear that word, that emotion of tiredness, that's not an emotion, but whatever emotion connection that is connected with the heavy allows us to start actually feeling that way. And words actually have power over our emotions.
That's actually where the connotation of a word comes from. It comes from the emotional response that you get from the word.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the memory that you get. But the whole point I want, just kind of to seal this all up, is your importance, how much you truly value something is connected to how much you will remember it by. And that is why when you like there's all these examples that come out from that. Like, do you remember her last name when you met her? Or like, do you remember like that first date or the first kiss? Because those are very important.
So you're saying
events.
that the way in which we rank the importance of this memory has to do with how much emotion we felt.
Exactly.
Quantity and quality.
Exactly. And when you recall your best moments with your pals, that is because they were the most important moments to you. Mm-hmm. And that's another topic that I don't want to go into, but I really want to stress that your emotions are tied to your memories. So let's say you took somebody that didn't have the ability to feel emotions. Yeah. You would find that their memory is not, it's just weird. Like their memory doesn't keep track of the right things, or just keep tracks of random instances that you don't even understand why they keep track of.
Is this has this been studied in like research?
Yeah, so there's several, and now this is more of a theory at this point, but the whole point is that if you don't have emotions to get a value system, you don't know which memories to recall because you don't know what has value or not to recall it later on. And another interesting fact on memories is that, like this is a counter thinking, but the more you recall a memory, the less accurate it becomes. So if you remember something, like let's say you remember your 5th birthday and you remember blowing out the candles, and you've like recalled that maybe 10 times in your life, and that would be more accurate than the memory if you had recalled it 100 times in your life. And you might say that makes no sense. How can that be?
Yeah, that's weird. And also, what people say about the memory will manipulate the memory in your mind.
Right.
Right. I'll get into an example of that in a second.
Yeah. But the reason why I'm saying that is because of the halo example that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. It's because every time you recall a memory, you fill in details that weren't there. And every time you do that, you're filling in more and more details. And then those previously filled in details add more details that aren't even there. Yeah. So let's get that.
Okay. So there's the show on television called Mind Games, and they do a lot of stuff with memory. So they did this experiment, and I'm sure that this experiment's been repeated many times. I don't want to look at an experiment that just has like n equals 1, like one sample. But what they did is they staged a mugging where they had like a bunch of different people, and a lot of it was all set up. But there was some individuals around the mugging who were not involved, like who were not in on it.
Right.
Okay. And so this mugging occurred, and then they had like a jury date, like, and they put this person. This person was then a witness, like in the case or something. They brought them in. And so they started asking them questions about what they saw when the mugging happened.
Right.
But it turned out, like, what they did is that they put together this group where, like, half of the individuals were in on it and half weren't. Huh. And so the group that was in on it would purposely manipulate stuff. They'd say, like, oh, the coat that was worn was purple. Someone else might say it was red, but they'd insist that it was purple very confidently. Yeah. And then what you saw is that the people who were actually there and saw the red coat started thinking more about it. They'd be like, oh, the more I think about it, it was purple. Yeah. But it wasn't. And this whole experiment was to illustrate how bad witness testimony is. It's as we try to recall something more, it gets less vivid. Like, right. We see it even more unclear. And in this example, just someone else talking about how it should be actually manipulated our memory of it in our mind.
Right. Yeah. Now, there's a little bit more I want to talk about. The main parts I want to talk about was memories and relationships. So let's say you just meet somebody and you don't really know much about them. And as on the previous podcast, we talked about like how you talk about the superficial stuff first, and you eventually get to the more comfortable stuff. But if you think about it, the only reason why you can jump to the comfortable stuff with someone you know well is because you have shared memories of them. Yeah. So if you there are conditions where people have long-term and short-term memory loss. So they might remember everything that happened to them that day, but the next day they have no recollection at all. Mm-hmm. And you will find that those people simply just cannot have relationships with other people. You can't have a relationship because what ends up happening, and it's very
like, let's say you got through that sort of superficial phase into a more comfort phase. Yeah. And next time you see them, they don't have that recollection of going it, and you have to start over.
Start from the beginning. So like when grandma doesn't remember your name, or she doesn't remember like, oh, you're in school, or oh, you're going to be a scientist, like it's a restart every single time, and it's an extremely sad condition because what ends up happening is you basically can't have a relationship with people. You don't know what it's like to have a relationship with people, and you don't know why everybody else acts the way they do because you're like, wow, you're like just so direct to them. You didn't even talk about the superficial stuff. You just went straight in.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because oftentimes, like when we are a new person going into a group of friends, we feel really uncomfortable because everyone else is communicating on a different level than us. Right. Well, we're still on that superficial level while they feel much more comfortable around each other. Or it's like when you go to someone's house and they're yelling at their mom, they're like, "Mom, do this." You're like, how could you do that? Right. Like, yeah. It's because there's like a further relationship. The relationship has progressed to a further phase than the one you're in with a person.
Exactly. So what I'm trying to say is that this all ties back to why like keeping your brain extremely healthy is very important. Mm-hmm. And that's a completely separate issue. But one thing I wanted to stress is that when you create a memory with somebody, the reason that you might say, oh, it's just a memory and that's just it. But the problem is that is actually a connection that you, like an emotional connection that you both share. And the memory, remember, because the memory is drawn up by emotions, those emotions that you experience is what is valuable between the two people. And that's because they both experience the same emotion. That's why they both value it very importantly, and that's why it's a very solid connection.
And that's why, like we discussed in the last podcast, like a big element of friendship are shared experience and time,
right,
which connect to, obviously. As you share experience with someone, that becomes valuable because these memories are stored with emotional connection. So when you think of that person, you have all these memories to fall back upon.
Right. And the one last thing I want to just talk about, we talked about this other time, but your memories are stored in reverse chronology, and they're important to you in reverse chronology. So if you went on a trip for maybe like 2 weeks or something, and you went to Florida, when you got back, it'd be like, how was your trip? Did you enjoy it? And you would say, yeah, I enjoyed it. And then you would probably talk about the last 3 days the most, as opposed to the rest of the trip, because that was the last thing on your mind. And that's really important because when you're talking to somebody like your boss, or you're talking to somebody, it can actually be like a distraction, because they're not thinking about, let's say you talked to your boss like 5 days ago about an issue, and then they're involved in all this other stuff, and then they are talking to you again. What's more important on their mind is the person they just met with, not your issue 5 days ago.
Yeah.
And so it's good to remind people of your issue before, because they haven't thought of that issue, probably because they've been focused on.
And you've probably been thinking about it all the time.
Yeah, you've been thinking about it all the time. Yeah, exactly.
And just like a way that this can be used practically, like understanding this concept, defense attorneys often strategically plan out the days so that the last thing that the jury hears is one of their witnesses or something that they want to put on. They know it's very bad for them to end on a note that's positive for the prosecution.
Right. Yeah.
So they will purposely delay the prosecution's case just so that they can end on whatever they want to end on.
Right.
And so that's important, and they recognize the importance of memory and use that to their advantage.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can too in some other way.
Here's some just science facts that are not maybe related to relationships as much, but I just thought were interesting to know. So you might say, like, how is it possible for a person to not remember like relationships, like the next day they don't remember anything, but yet they can still speak English? Like, how is it possible for them to remember the words to speak English, but yet only have the relationships get wiped? Does that make sense?
Yeah. You're saying, like, why isn't that?
Like, why wasn't there like even their body language wasn't wiped? They know how to eat, they know how to walk. Like, how come their balance hasn't been?
Why is it just one area?
Why is it just one area? And the answer lies in how you form your memories. It's a very complicated subject, and that we don't fully understand. But the thing is that when you learn like words, like the average person can hold about 30,000 words in their vocabulary. And that is true, but people who speak other languages have more. But the point is,
it's held in different areas of the brain.
Yeah. Your Wernicke's area is like the main language area. And the other day they actually found out how you store a word in your Wernicke's area, which it's like a neural pathway to do that. So we're understanding more and more about this. But the point is that these are like more factual concepts that you still have emotions tied to, but they're long-term factual concepts that you have revisited over and over and over again, so that it's harder to destroy. There are more neurons dedicated to that memory, so it's harder to destroy it. So when you have like the entire English language, there are thousands and thousands of neurons dedicated to that, as opposed to only just a few neurons for like a memory. And so your English language actually is going down as well, but you still have a majority of neurons dedicated to it, so it doesn't appear as if you're losing your English ability. And that's just an important concept to recognize. So basically, I just want to emphasize that memory is really important. It's tied to emotions, and the emotions ultimately tell you the importance of it. And because it's such an important faculty that you use for relationships, it's an extremely important technique, or I guess idea to just know. When you're looking at a picture, the picture can reignite different memories, and when you reminisce with somebody, what you're really doing is bonding with them actually again. It's really not a waste of time, because you're both reawakening your memories and strengthening those connections. One last thing. Okay,
well, the one thing I was going to add to this real quick is another really interesting thing about memory in general is that the state of mind in which we're in affects our recollection of certain memories. So if I study for a test and I'm ecstatic when I study for a test, like I'm really happy about something, and then the next day, like I'm groggy and stuff, I'm less likely to recall the stuff I studied for the next day, because we tend to remember the stuff that happened in the state while we're in the state.
Right.
So if I'm really happy and something happens to me, I'm most likely not to remember that unless I'm happy. So this is really important to notice, especially among people who have depression. Because when you get depressed, you get stuck in this negative state. And then what happens is that you can only recall stuff that happened while you were in that negative state, or cause you to go to that negative state. So when you're depressed, you have a very poor recollection of all the good stuff in your life that you can appreciate. And by recognizing that, of course, you can maybe, start thinking about some of those things and maybe try to recall those events.
Right. Now, the last thing I'll say, I don't mean to scare people with this, and this is just one experiment, and we don't know what the side effects are. This was done in rats. But some scientists have been able to figure out a way to destroy specific memories.
Wow.
So, in other words, like, you might say, well, isn't it harder to destroy all memories? No, it's not. You just give someone a toxin and they're dead.
By the way, there's a movie on this, like, where there's this organization that destroy certain memories in people that they want removed.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, but now they have been able to do this with like rats, for example. So if like a rat has learned how to solve a maze, you could destroy that memory so that the rat has to relearn from day one how to solve the maze again. And you know, it raises a lot of ethical questions, and that's why I don't want to get into it. But the point is that we're really starting to understand this, and in a way, it can be good because we can use this understanding to help people with Alzheimer's or other neurological disorders to restore that. There's like a lot of stem cell therapies being developed, a lot of gene therapies being developed to restore that neuron function, to rebuild new memories. And if someone has like Alzheimer's, for example, yes, maybe their old memories are lost and gone for good, but with like these different therapies, they can at least learn more memories now. Their ability to actually learn memories increases, and so they maybe are like a person anew type of thing.
Wow, yeah.
So I just want to let you know, like the whole point is like your memories kind of define who you are, and they also define what your relationships are with other people. So anyways, that kind of concludes my memories.
Yeah. So today I'm going to be talking about love.
Oh man.
So love is a very complicated topic. So I apologize if I leave something out or if I offend someone, because I really am not trying to. I'm trying to just put a perspective out there, take it or leave it, basically. So one of the reasons why I find love so complicated is because the English language lacks sufficient definitions to explain the different types of love that exist. Okay. So in Latin, there's five different types of love. So people say stuff like, I love God. People say, I love my mother. People say, I love my wife.
I love pizza.
And I love pizza. And each one of those loves has an entirely different meaning. But yet in the English language, we only have one.
Right.
And as we were talking about before with memory, we kind of jamble all of these different words to different emotions.
Right.
And so it makes it for a very complicated situation. So the first type of love that I want to distinguish is infatuation. Almost all of us can relate to infatuation as something that happened to us at one point. Maybe there's some girl out there that was just so amazing that she's never experienced like a crush that didn't like her back. So I want to talk a little bit about what has happened here. It's also going to tie into what love is in a relationship too. And keep in mind that I want to distinguish between different types of love. So in infatuation, what happens is that we start associating a chemical feeling to a person.
Right.
The common tendency of someone who's infatuated with another person is to see no wrong in that person.
Right.
And we've all experienced this, like in high school, like, you know, we liked someone and we just, like, we always think about them, we get obsessed with them. Some of us got a little creepy and stuff. But ultimately what we're experiencing is sort of this emotional connection between our memories of them and emotions that we felt. And everyone goes through this at some point with someone.
Yeah.
But it's a different type of love. Infatuation is not the same type of love that like a wife and a husband have together.
Right.
It's just an obsession and an addiction. And I'll get into that too.
I just want to just throw some numbers your way. So with like infatuation, there's a lot of different numbers that we speculate about. So for example, we're thinking like, perhaps your first time that you're infatuated on average of 1.5 years, like a year and a half to 2 years. But every time, so let's say that's your first infatuation, and then your second or your third is less. So it might go from a year and a half to a year and a quarter to a year, like of course approximately. And with time, your average infatuation decreases. So when you're 20, or maybe when you're 15, it's a year and a half. But if your first infatuation was when you're 30, it would be like a year.
And I think one of the reasons why this might occur, why as you get older, the length of your infatuation decreases, is because experience shows us that life, changes, life gets better, that this girl isn't the only girl in the world that's like this, or this guy isn't the only guy in the world that's like this.
Right.
So we start to meet more people and we realize like, oh, I felt this way about this person when I was 13, but now that I'm 18, I feel the same way. But was that guy before better or not?
Yeah, right.
And so as we get experience, I think that contributes to why our infatuation time decreases.
Yeah.
So the next type of love I kind of want to distinguish is sort of the honeymoon love that people feel. And the reason why I call it honeymoon is because it's sort of a temporary feeling. When people are in a relationship together, like a new relationship, I think that they feel like this different type of love for I think about 3 months because of a certain chemical that's produced during that time.
So wait, are you saying the first 3 months of the relationship?
The first 3 months of a relationship.
Okay.
And obviously this will extend into like the first couple of years of a marriage and stuff, but not to the same extent that the first 3 months.
Yeah.
And this is a chemical love. Huh. And a chemical love is really important to understand. And by understanding the chemical love, we can understand infatuation better.
Right.
So basically, like when we're with someone and, like we're clicking and stuff, we start releasing more drugs in our brain that make us feel really great.
Well, yeah, different hormones, really.
Different hormones.
Chemical signals, yeah.
And we start releasing these. And this is why, like, when we first meet someone, we feel really good. And, like, the common joke is, like, marriage is like, kindergarten. Like, before you go to kindergarten, you're incredibly excited to go to school. But then the first week, you're like, shoot, I have 18 more years of this. Like,
Yeah,
are you kidding
exactly.
me? But what happens there with marriage is that people often say like, oh, we were in love at first, but now we're not in love anymore.
Yeah.
And what they're really describing is this like chemical love that people experience.
Right. So,
But it's important to distinguish that between a higher level of love that people experience.
Yeah, right. And I don't want to be like a relationship counselor here, but one
Yeah.
thing we're trying to say from this infatuation and chemical love is that before you marry someone, you want to make sure you're out of the chemical love and infatuation phase.
Yeah, and have progressed to it.
Yeah, because your infatuation phase makes you blind to other people's flaws.
Mm-hmm.
You just say, well, no, it's not that big of a deal. Like, or I'm sure they'll turn that around. Or that's fine. I could live with that. And the thing is that you probably couldn't. And so what ends up happening is like you fall in love, like you're infatuated, you marry in that year, and then the next maybe 4 years later, you just realize that you're not in love with this
Things
person.
evolve, and then you lose that chemical feeling that you had.
Right.
Now, I think that the best analogy to understand this chemical love is like drugs. Like it's very similar to being like high on a drug, but you feel it for a long period of time.
Right.
And to people, the most addicting thing that there is are emotions. People are incredibly addicted to emotions. It's just like
an addiction, I think, is a type of emotion.
Yeah, it stimulates certain like neurons in your brain that cause you to feel
goes back and forth. Right.
And so people are incredibly addicted to emotions and stuff. And so when you feel this great feeling for like 3 months, and then boom, it goes away.
Yeah.
Your brain is not ready to let go of it. It's just like if you try like cocaine one time, you probably won't stop because your brain is chemically dependent
or
on
even
it.
caffeine. Like like even caffeine. But there's different chemical dependency rates.
Mm-hmm.
So like nicotine is different than like really like illegal drugs because of how chemically dependent you can become on them. You can become addicted to anything.
Yeah,
you can
become addicted to anything, like video games and stuff. But emotions are powerful addictions, especially because of the duration of the emotion that we feel.
Right.
And the connection to the memories, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So basically, when this period is up, your brain is still wanting this emotion and stuff.
Right.
And this is where we see infatuation come in a lot. Like let's say that two people are dating, and they date for like 3 or 4 months, and then they break up. Well, neither person is ready to let go of this emotion.
Right.
And this is why they try to get back together and try to recreate this emotional feeling that they have with the person.
Hence the rebound.
The rebound person, yeah.
And that's why the rebound fails, because the thing that you're trying to make up
cannot be made up most of the time.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's a superficial type of love.
Right.
It's just a chemical love, and it's controlled mainly a lot by hormones and things of that nature.
Now, one thing particularly like interesting that I found about this is the year of infatuation. Like, why is it a year? Why not 5 years? Why not 6 months? Why not 10 years? Why not 50 years? And if you think about it, like a year just happens to be the appropriate amount of time to get someone pregnant and to stay with them throughout the pregnancy.
That's interesting.
And if you think about it, that would be the most evolutionary advantaged like male that you could get, because you stay with the woman until she has the children. And then right when they have the children, the woman is probably, from her hormones, are going to take care of those children no matter what. Yeah. And so you go to the next woman. So
that's probably why we see a lot of that.
And that's I think that's why there's that year-long infatuation. Now, I'm not trying to undermine love.
Yeah, that's what the thing is. Like, we're
explain,
trying to distinguish the difference between sort of like this animal love versus like this
real romantic
metaphysical love that's
Right. And so that I think is the reason why we have infatuation in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, you would want something that would make you oblivious to other people's flaws in order to like successfily reproduce with them.
Yeah, that's
and then
a great point.
And then eventually, like, once you see their flaws, it's fine because you can leave them and you'd still have offspring from them. Mm-hmm. So and I'm really not trying to say
we're not pushing that at all.
I'm not. Yeah,
that's terrible.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's absolutely terrible. But I just think that's why it is the way it is.
I think that's a phenomenal point.
Yeah. So, well, you make phenomenal points too. Teamwork.
So like that crush that you had in high school, basically what we're seeing is something that's very similar to like a cocaine addict who is like no longer gets that drug he wants. He becomes obsessed with that drug and it's the only thing he thinks about. Right. So too does a guy who has that crush on the girl. The girl doesn't like him back, but he wants his emotions so badly that he continually hunts for them, like that cocaine addict looking for more cocaine. And so this is like the very superficial love that we as human beings feel because of like our animal nature. And it's often, when I say often, I mean almost all the time, seen as true love and real love. And because of that, the lack of distinction between these two, I think it is one reason why we have a huge divorce rate. Yeah. Because people think that chemical love that they feel is love, and then when that chemical love goes away, they say, "I'm not in love anymore." Right. Well, they were never in love to begin with.
Right.
And so I guess we could talk a little bit about what like true love is, but well, I'm no like expert on this because I can't say that I've been there.
Yeah, and I can't say I'm an expert either. But one thing I would say is I think true love is where someone is actually your best friend. Like, if you look at friendships, for example, like 5-year, 10-year friendships, you ask yourself, like, what held those together? And I mean, like, it's not because like they're the opposite sex or anything like that. It's because you have the common shared interests and
common goals, shared goals. Yeah,
you can relate to each other very well, and more importantly, I think, is that you are emotionally understood by the other person. You think about the same things and you can understand what the other person is saying, and I actually think that's why you can't have a relationship like with your mom or something like that, because your mom can't emotionally understand what you are going through, and that's why you date somebody who is your
and that's
age.
Why your love for your mother is very different from the love you have for her. That's a very different love, and there should be a different word in the English language to describe that type of love, or a love for God or something.
Right. And, sorry, I just want to finish. So the point is that the reason why you would date someone who is the same age as you is, well, obviously there's the whole evolutionary
reasons,
but secondly, and I think this is more importantly, is that they are in your situation. They're in your shoes more, and so they are more capable of emotionally understanding you.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing I wanted to bring up is I thought Jerry Seinfeld had a great joke about sort of this idea that like when we date someone we really get to know who they are and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, he talked about like why we fail to be friends with someone we've dated for a long time, and he's like, the reason why we fail to be friends, like when we're dating someone, we both know the ins and outs of each other and stuff. We know each other so well, so when we break up, we know everything that the person's doing, everything they're saying, and that's why we can't be friends anymore. It's like two magicians showing each other tricks that both of them know how to do. Like, here's the rabbit out of the hat. Like, that's not cool because I know how you did that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, kind of the mystique of a relationship disappears because we know each other so well, and that's one of the reasons why I think friendships don't last after relationships often.
Right. So so that was like the infatuation and then the actual real love. And I think another thing too is just because you're in real love does not necessarily mean you're not going to get divorced. So like, let's say like you're in real love. I don't think like you're immune to divorce at that point. I think that does happen to some people because like an incident can happen to somebody else and actually like change their personality completely. Like a gambling addiction is like a very...
Well, I'd say that in that case then that you can be brought out of love. Love is not an eternal thing.
Right.
It is something that, like, obviously the chemical thing, it has a limited time.
Right.
But the love of a relationship maybe has more duration, but it doesn't mean it's not limited. You can stop loving. And I think as a relationship grows and evolves, love becomes more of like a verb. It's something that you do. Like, you relate to that person like as a best friend. You communicate with each other on a level that no one else communicates.
Yeah.
And I think that's what true love is that. But yeah, divorce is not like not going to happen necessarily.
Right.
But when you are in that state of loving someone like that, it's definitely less likely.
Yeah. And one thing I want to talk to you about divorce especially is divorce, in my belief, is not something that happens overnight. It is like a fortitude of feelings that you've had built up and accumulated for like months at least.
Yeah, and this is why, a lot of like relationship gurus talk about how communication is so important.
Right.
Often, like, before divorce happens, I mean, I have no experience from this, but this is what I've read, is that there starts to be like a lack of communication about the emotions being felt. In a healthy relationship, both people may dislike each other, but they will discuss it with each other and discuss their problems with each other and then solve them. The problem with a lot of relationships that eventually end in a divorce is that there's not all this stuff that is being felt is not communicated until it just blows up, and then the divorce occurs.
As a general rule, if you're in a relationship and everything is going too well, like she has no complaints about you, that is a bad sign.
Well, it could be like the infatuation period.
It could be infatuation, or if it's like too long to be an infatuation, like 5 years later, there's probably some miscommunication or you're not communicating enough.
And if you're in a relationship and you're feeling bad emotions towards someone, yet you want to maintain the relationship, the most healthy thing to do is to communicate those bad emotions that you feel to the person in a respectful manner, of course.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to say like, look, you're getting too fat for me to be in a relationship with. I mean, that's terrible, but like, people do that, and people like build up these things and they stop communicating with each other. And I think the lack of communication, like I've heard people say that, it's a bad sign when the person stops caring about an argument. Like, two couples will often fight with each other, but when one of the people stops fighting, that's a bad sign.
Yeah,
so it means that they don't care anymore.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think we could talk about arguing. That's a whole nother topic. But I think one thing that I want to clarify is the opposite of an argument, the opposite of no communication is total communication and willing communication. So like a lot of people will like, check on them like, hey, you're home, right? Like, you're not going out with anybody, like you're just home, right? That's completely terrible communication. That's I don't trust you communication. Yeah. But communication of just sitting down and, as Stephen Covey puts it, giving them the talking stick. That means no matter what they say, you cannot open your mouth. And
that's a great tool, by the way.
Yeah, and you might be like, okay, that's so easy. Like, I could totally do that.
It
is so hard.
I have a hard time doing
it. Try to do it for 10 minutes. I guarantee you will want to say at least one thing, no matter how shy you are. 20 minutes if you're a pro, and 30 if you're just amazing. Like, honestly,
Nick is the only person I know who can get 30 minutes, probably.
No, man. Okay, cool. But anyways, so I think that is like a 30-minute conversation where you don't say anything and express it to them. I would say, honey, I think I haven't been very emotionally true to you, and I'm not saying I'm going to be able to change that overnight. It'll probably take me a very long time, but I want to. And I just read about this in this book, or I heard this on this amazing podcast you should check out. and I was just like, here's that talking stick here's a talking stick idea, and here I want to give that to you for 30 minutes. And is that okay with you? I wouldn't just do that without explaining it, because they're gonna be like, what is wrong with you? Are you trying to manipulate me or something? Like, if you are always just arguing with somebody, and then all of a sudden you just like not talk at all, they're gonna be like, what? Is he even there? Like, what is he doing? So I think in communicating the intention of wanting to emotionally connect and then trying to emotionally listen to somebody is one of the most powerful things you can do, not only in love, in like relationship love and marriage love, but also with like your kids, or with your friends. I think, or with your parents. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, this podcast we'll do a podcast on how to raise kids, even though we've never had. Just kidding.
Yeah. Well,
well, the one thing I want to close on. Are you okay with closing now?
I just had a few more things.
Yeah. Why don't you finish before?
So I just want to talk about like the love of like how people will use love to kind of, how do I say this? Sometimes love is not love because it's more of like a fame, reputation, like getter. So what I mean by that is like, it's kind of like saying in high school, like you're the hot couple, so you get all the attention, or you have a boyfriend, so like you're really like you're the new couple.
You're the adorable couple that's like really in love or something.
Right, and I think sometimes people like get into relationships, or they like score like this girl or something like that, because they don't really like the girl at all. They're not infatuated with her. They're more concerned about building the reputation.
And it should be pointed out that this isn't necessarily bad. Like, we do it all the time subconsciously, as we create relationships with other people to affect our image in our society. Yeah,
and I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but I'm just saying people do this to boost their reputation. And the thing is that like the most common example is like the trophy wife example, where people are like, oh wow, she looks amazing, she's beautiful, like she's really pretty, and I think there is some evolutionary dynamics to this. Like, I think actually in older times, like the men who had more power had more attractive women.
And this is why there's like pre-selection and stuff. Like, if a girl sees you walk into a club with like 5 other girls,
right,
and she's going to associate that like all these qualities with you through that thin slice,
right,
and assume that you're an attractive guy.
Yeah.
And the same thing is like if another guy sees your trophy wife, he's going to assume that you must be an attractive guy to get that attractive girl.
Right.
And that's why it's not necessarily bad, because it happens regardless of whether we consciously manipulate it or not.
But one thing, I mean, this is just an opinion, but I honestly feel like the best memories I have had are memories that are very inexpensive. Now you might be like, what does that have to do with love? But I'll try and make the bridge. Like, what I mean by this is that, like, when I think about like the best moments I've had, all I've needed really are like maybe like a kitchen, or like a soccer ball, or like a tent. Okay. And those things are so cheap. And you don't need fame, money, or any like superior amount of talent to get this. Or maybe even just like making a little fire and sitting around the fire, making like, the whole point is that a lot of people get wrapped up in money, fame, and they do that for love. Like, they do that for marriage. Like the trophy wife, for example. People will like will try to fall in love with somebody to get one of those things. But the whole reason why they're falling in love with somebody is to make themselves happy. But in reality, what does make you happy are the emotional understanding of another person.
And this ties into natural rewards. Like, the woman who marries the guy for money will not get the natural reward of feeling love.
Right.
When you marry someone without the intention of, because you genuinely are interested in them, you don't feel the natural reward, natural emotions that come from that.
Yeah.
And in the trophy wife example is perfectly like that.
Right. And I mean, so yeah, another way to say it is, I think what is more valuable is to be, very poor and to actually have someone that emotionally understands you, than to be very rich and famous but not have someone that emotionally understands you.
And pretty much every like celebrity, every wealthy person will attest to this. We're not wealthy, so we can't really say. Right. But if you read or you listen to them talk, this is something that they commonly strive.
And that's this common thing that, but it kind of, I mean, I'm not trying to be cheesy here or something like that, because every movie ends like this, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that the very best moments or the best memories that you can get are usually not memories based upon monetary things that you have, but rather from being emotionally understood. And that is cheap. That's free, but it's hard. It's still very hard to get
because people won't give you the talking stick.
Yeah,
they want to input their own things.
Exactly.
This is a big Stephen Covey thing too. We both love Stephen Covey.
Yeah, right. So, anyways, that's the thoughts I had.
Yeah, no, that was great. So I just want to end. Of course, I really have no expertise in marriage and things like that, but my expertise in it just comes from my observation of other people and the books I've read and things like that. But I'd say like the big problem that people have with marriage is that they go in with incorrect expectations. They go in expecting to feel that chemical high the whole time that they're married. And I think that this is why people end up in divorces and things like that, because they expect this to continue. I think before you get into a marriage, like one thing that I want to do before I get into a marriage is make sure that, I'm not dependent on this person for this emotion they're giving me, but that we're both, independent individuals who both make ourselves better, like mutually benefit from our relationship. Like Stephen Covey talks a lot about this, but oftentimes relationships are very dependent. We feel entirely dependent on another person for the emotions they give us, and we don't feel secure about ourselves unless they validate us. And it's important that both people have reached this point of independence where they can feel good about themselves just through their own thoughts before they get married, and that they don't have these expectations of this continual chemical love, and they're ready to evolve into a deeper love. So those are my last thoughts, and
deep stuff.
Thanks for listening, guys. Check out our other podcasts. They're probably going to be right here.
All right. Thanks, guys.